To a new creature tutorial. This tutorial is going to go through a couple of the common motors that you should be aware about in Creature. So this is for those people new to Creature, and it's a good introduction to the procedural animation or motor system of Creature. Alright, so I assume that you've already watched or learned how to rig and mesh a character in Creature. So if you haven't, please go watch the tutorials on how to mesh or rig your character to set your character up for animation. Okay, so assuming you have set up your character for animation, we're going to work with this character today, this knight character here today. And once you set the character up correctly for bone skinning weighting, the first thing you're going to see is the character is in the default rest position that you set it up in rig mode, correct? Alright, and let's start off with the basics, which is manual animation, or in Creature we call it FK animation. Now FK stands for forward kinematics, and that is basically keyframe animation, okay? And let's start with doing some keyframing. So how do you do keyframing in Creature? Well, super simple. You come in here, you select a bone, alright, and then you just move it, and you step forward a couple frames, say frame 10, on the sheet on this dope sheet, this animation data sheet over here, and then you shift the bone again. All right. So as I step through the frames, you can see I've keyframed or animated the bones. Okay. Now, so a couple of questions you probably want to be answered. You want me to answer now, which is, for a regular bone, I guess you care about two things: its position and its angle. So how does it work? Well, for FK you have two controls, right? Let me zoom in. You have two controls for the bone for FK. You have the starting node control and the ending node control. The starting node control, if you drag it, changes the position of the bone. Alright, and then the ending node, even if you drag it away, you notice it doesn't actually move the bone, it just rotates it. So essentially it sets the target angle, or rather it rotates the bone. Right? So with these two control nodes, you essentially have all you need for manual keyframe animation. You can move the bone, and you can also rotate the bone. Alright, so hopefully this makes sense. And of course, you can animate this over time, right? You can animate the angle over time. And that's the whole point of doing manual keyframe animation, correct? So I can come in here and I can set a different keyframe, for example. Okay? Alright, so that's essentially FK. Now, before I continue to the other motors, you can always remove all the animation in your current clip by moving a mouse over to the remove motor, and you can say clear animation for all motors, and this will reset everything. Okay, now again, before I continue to the other motors, let me show you a couple of other controls you have for the keyframe or manual FK bones if you're doing lots of manual animation. So you could obviously select a single bone, but you can also select a chain of bones, like so, using multi-select, holding down the control key, or you can hold out a boundary, draw a boundary rectangle that also multi-selects. Or if you want to select all the children bones from a parent bone, you select the parent bone and you press Ctrl M. That gives you all the children. You can also do the opposite. You can start from a child and press Ctrl N, and that will walk up the hierarchy. Okay? So that gives you a couple of options. Now, if I select all the child bones, and if you're using the Pro version, you can do something fancier. Hold on your Shift key, and you can actually draw a curve. And it'll try to pose your feet according to the curve you've drawn in the best possible way. You know, it's limited obviously by the structure of your bone, but it's very useful for you if you're using like a stylus or tablet to basically pose a curve. Okay, so that's pretty cool, right? So that's essentially what you can do with the FK motors. You can keyframe this over time, of course. So if I come to frame 10, if I change the pose and now I step through it, you noticed I basically switched between two poses, right? Okay, so let me remove the animation again. Let's go back to the rest pose. The other thing you can do is if you actually drag and select a group of bones, you notice this boundary window shows up. Now this boundary window only shows up for FK bones, okay? And what you can do is you can actually do squash, stretch, and skew operations on these bunch of bones. So it actually applies very interesting skewing and squashing operations on it, right? You can actually drag your character and squash and stretch him in a bone type fashion. So there are some limitations, but the more bones you put, actually, the more it actually approximates a full-blown mesh-based, deformed squash and stretch system. So you can do a lot with it, because remember, everything in Creature is a mesh. So when you perform this operation, it's essentially doing skin mesh deformations with the bones, using the bones. And so the boundary will actually do a squash stretch on the bones, which will then in turn deform your mesh. So you can do quite a lot with this, and of course you can keyframe this, right? So if I go to frame 10, I can stretch this guy out again, right? And so you notice there, I can do different kinds of skewing and squashing just with the boundary nodes that I've selected. All right? Okay, so that's FK. That's the FK motor, and I'm going to continue onto the other motors. Okay, so the next motor I'm going to talk about is something very similar to the original FK motor, and I'm going to install it. It's called the free FK motor. Okay, so if I install it, you're going to see what's going to happen. It looks exactly like an FK motor, and it has the same controls, in fact, as the FK motor. It has also the angle and the positional controls. So you're probably wondering, what's the big deal about this motor? Why do we need another type of FK motor? So you're going to see why it's very useful right now. The free FK motor, the main difference between a free FK motor and an FK motor is that an FK motor actually responds to hierarchy. What do I mean by that? Well, take this bone for example. This bone over here has its parent over here, correct? So if I were to rotate the parent, you notice the bone, which is the child of the parent, also moves with the parent, correct? But notice something else is happening over here. This bone over here isn't moving. Why is that? That's because I've installed a free FK motor on it. A free FK motor essentially is a keyframe bone motor, a keyframe motor, essentially manual keyframe motor that doesn't involve any sort of hierarchy whatsoever. And so it's extremely useful if, say, you have, say, a leg system and you just wanted the feet to be planted at a specific location and never ever move. And you can move the parent and it would never bother about what the parent, where it was, because it's always glued to that specific location. So it's very useful if you want to glue stuff together, because this guy, if I keyframe him, this guy will just move wherever he wants with no relation to the parent whatsoever. I can move the parent in the middle and it won't affect this bone over here. See, this bone isn't moving. So that is the free FK motor. You notice it's a very powerful motor because it allows you to glue stuff, stick stuff to a specific point in space, and you can also use it to animate, say, throwing objects. Say you had a sword or an arrow that had to be shot out from, say, a bow, and you wanted the arrow might be the child of the bow, but all you need to do is install a free FK motor on it, and then you can animate that arrow to follow something else and not worry about where the bow is. So that's what a free FK motor is. So it's very useful, again, if you want to use it to glue bones to specific locations, or you want it to animate a free moving object that has no relation to its parents. Now moving on to the next motors that you probably need to know about, we're moving on to something called IK, which is inverse kinematics. So what is inverse kinematics? Well, for example, let's say we wanted to pose these two bones, or even these three bones, and we wanted to pose them in such a way that the tip bone is always pointing or attempting to hit a certain target location. Okay? And you want the tip to hit that location and everything else just to fall into place. In other words, you're saying to the system, can I have the end bone try to hit a specific target and then sort out the rest of the bones for me? That's what inverse kinematics is, or IK, right? So let's see it in action. So let's select these two bones, right? And I have a choice of IK motors to pick from. I can either choose the default IK motor, or I can choose the smooth IK motor. Now, which one to choose is up to you. The IK motor is a bit more accurate, okay? However, the smooth IK motor, because of the way it's designed during animation, it will actually be what you call smoother. It will actually have a more coherent type of motion. And so when you're starting out, I do recommend using the smooth IK motor, especially if you have tons of bones. And then you can move on to the regular IK motor when you're familiar with the controls and you know what you're doing. So let's try the smooth IK motor first and see what we get. So let's try this, okay? Now let's move the target around, and you notice, look what's going on. As I move the target around, the two bones are basically trying to follow the target, right? And that's essentially IK in action. The system is trying to solve for the joint angles of the two bones as I try to set a target. And if I move the target too far, you see it locks into place because there's a limit to how far your bones can stretch, correct? Because that's the length of the bones you had defined in your rig. But that's what IK is, and it's obviously super useful for arms or legs or any kind of walking or running type motion that you're going to use. That's what I assume you're going to be using IK for. Now, there are a couple of controls on the IK motor. You can change the IK angles. So what does this mean? So right now it's in the positive mode, which means it's only allowed to bend. As you notice, these two bones are bending in this way. If I move it to the other side, they don't bend, right? That's because the valid IK angles are set to positive. I can always change the mode to negative, and if it's a negative mode, now you can see it's bending here, but when I move it in the other quadrants, or whatever you want to call it, it doesn't bend, correct? So that's the difference between the two modes, and you pick and choose the mode based on the type of leg motion or arm motion you're going for, depending on how your limbs actually bend, because limbs have a constraint or angular limit on how they can bend. So you pick between the positive or negative modes depending on what you're going for. So that is the smooth IK or IK motor, and of course you can keyframe these. So I can set it here, and I say at frame 0 I can move them to the side, and so if I step through the frames, that's how the IK motor works. Okay? Right. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next motor now, and it's very similar to the IK motor. It's called the smooth IK rotate motor. Alright, so we are going to take a look at what I call the smooth IK rotate motor, and we're going to install it. Let's pick two bones that will make it somewhat interesting. Let's try this bone and this bone. Alright, so we can pick the smooth IK rotate motor. Let's pick a valid IK angle. Let's see what we get. Let's play the animation. That's pretty cool, right? So what is it actually doing? Okay, let's stop it. So what it's actually doing is it's running a regular IK motion, but it's targeting this arc, this circular arc here. That's essentially what a smooth IK rotate motor is. So imagine if you have IK, but the target point is circling around this path over here. Okay, and you can change a lot of parameters on this arc. Of course, that's how you make it useful. You can, by the way, all these parameters are keyable over time. That's essentially how it works. So you can actually change these parameters, keyframe them, and then make the IK rotate motor change its behavior at each keyframe. Okay, but let's take a look at some parameters. So I can change the height of this circle. So if I change it to 2, now it's a taller circle. So if I play it, you notice the arm is moving vertically in a taller fashion, correct? And vice versa, I can change the width of it so it becomes a uniform circle which is much larger, correct? I can also change the specifics of how it's scaled. For example, I can change how much it's scaled on the left, so I can change the scaling to 0, and this basically slices the circle, so now it becomes half a circle, and so it will trace this semicircle, okay? in more of a flat motion as it hits the end of the circle. Correct? I can also change how it's scaled on the top. So I can change the factor to say 0.5. It'll take it down. And so now it traces a smaller circle, semicircle, sorry, as it goes to the top. So you can actually customize the shape of this arc very easily, and you can get some really interesting motion. So immediately, this is useful for any kind of simple walk cycle. You can use this to make a very simple walk cycle using the IK rotate motor. And I do cover how to do a simple walk cycle in the other tutorials. So please watch some of the intro tutorials where I use the IK rotate motor to do a very quick and simple walk cycle. And there are also other ways to do custom walk cycles in Creature, which I'll go into later. Now there's other parameters on the IK rotate motor. You can change the speed. Right now the speed is 2. You can set it to 1. It will move slower, right? And I can make it faster. You get the idea. So feel free to play around with the parameters. Again, they're all keyable over time, and that gives you a lot of flexibility. Okay. Now, before I go on to the next motor, at this juncture, you're probably wondering, well, okay, these motors are really, really cool, but what if I still wanted a keyframe on top of the existing motion? Is it possible? Well, it's definitely possible. And the way you do this in Creature is you can install a more advanced procedural motor, like a smooth IK rotate motor. Get the motion you sort of want. It might not be 100% there. You get the motion you sort of want, and you move your mouse over to the Convert to FK button, and then you say Convert Selected Motor to FK. Now you click Convert, and if you play the animation, it looks exactly the same, correct? You think nothing's changed, but actually a lot of things have changed. If you click on the bone again, you notice there's no smooth IK rotate motor anymore. In fact, it's just a regular FK motor. So what's actually happened is Creature has actually converted your smooth IK rotate motor's motion completely into just manual FK keyframes. So now you're back in your manual mode, and you can also look at the animation graph. The splines of the animation curve are all here for you to tweak. Correct? So let me show you. So this is a very powerful way for you to essentially come in and basically use the procedural motors, get the motion that you sort of want. It might not, again, might not be 100% there, but it's close enough. Then you convert it back to FK motion, and then you can come in and tweak to your heart's content. And that is a very powerful way to work, because the procedural system allows you to get to the results almost, really quickly, and then you can tweak the last 20 or 10% of your motion to customize it to a certain style. So that's one of the ways where a lot of people like working with Creature, which makes it a very powerful system. So remember this button, Convert to FK, which could be very, very handy. Alright, so the next motor I'm going to use in conjunction with another motor, but let me introduce it to you now. The next motor is a very simple motor, a very simple procedural motor. It's called the Rotate Cycle motor. So let me move my mouse down and select it. Rotate Cycle, here it says, Rotate Cycle. Click on that, play it, it goes kind of crazy. That's because what it does is, as you can tell, it's basically rotating between two angles, right? And right now the end angle is set to 90 degrees and the start angle is negative 90 degrees. So we can change this. And of course, again, these are all keyframeable. Let's change it from negative 10 to, say, 10 degrees. Let's see what happens. Okay, that's more like it, right? And so this is what we call a rotate cycle motor. And it basically, as its description says, it rotates a cycle. It basically oscillates between a start angle and an end angle. That's a rotate cycle motor. You can change the speed of it. You can obviously make it faster. You can make it slower. Entirely up to you. And again, I want to emphasize, these values are keyable over time. Okay? Right. Now, you can chain them together. Now, let's see. If you have this rotate cycle motor over here, one of them here, okay? If I install another rotate cycle motor, let's try this guy over here. Let's install another rotate cycle motor. Okay. And let's set the end angles to be reasonable, right? see what the speed was before. It was 1.5. So let's set this guy to 1.5 as well. If we play it, there's two of them playing, but they're playing in phase, so nothing really interesting is going on. Well, let me increase the angle first, and then we can do a demonstration. All right. So we play it. There's two of them going on. They're playing in phase. That is, they're playing, you know, in sync. So nothing's really going on. But what if we change the phase? So phase is what allows you to make stuff interesting. In the rotate cycle motors, any kind of rotate motor, there's always this control attribute called phase, which you can change, and this basically makes the motion go out of sync, and that allows you to do some really interesting stuff. So if I set a value of say 1, now you can actually get some kind of follow-through motion. You see what I'm saying? Because this guy here is having a phase of 0, and this guy here is having a phase of 1. Okay, and now you can see, because they're not moving in sync, it almost seems like they're having some kind of follow-through motion, a bit like cloth. Right? So using a bunch of rotate cycle motors along a group of bones, you can actually fake a very simple follow-through motion. So that's something useful for you to know. And it's useful because you might want to use a bunch of rotate cycle motors to hit some follow-through motion with exact timing. And that's typically what people use the rotate cycle motors for. Okay? So let me clear this motor out first. All right? Because I want to move on to the next immediate motor, which also allows us to do a follow-through motion, but in a more efficient way. Okay, so again, let's take a look at what I have here. There's nothing. I cleared out all the motion, and let's install back the rotate cycle motor again. Let's set the angular limit to something more reasonable. And let me up the speed to 1.5 again. Okay, so nothing really interesting is happening, well, other than this piece of really, really rigid cloth, which doesn't really behave like cloth, correct? Because cloth is supposed to be wavy. And this brings me to the next motor. Now, the base motor is a rotate cycle motor, which I just covered. Wouldn't it be cool if we could make the rest of the bones just waver like a flag or a piece of cloth? That's what we're going for in the wind, right? And you could obviously, as I mentioned before, you could install a rotate cycle motor at every one of these bones, tweak the phases, and get a follow-through motion. You can get a really convincing one too, but that's a bit time-consuming. And what if you changed the speed of the base rotate cycle motor? That would actually result in you having to change all the other attributes of the other rotate cycle motors to make them look realistic, like a real follow-through motion. Because every time you change the base, as you know, the follow-through motion's properties will change as well. So there's an exact motor for that. That's called the bend physics motor. So right now I'm going to select the bone over here. I'm going to press Ctrl M. That gives me all the child bones. And I'm going to install a bend physics motor. And let me play it. Oh, it went really, really crazy and it settles down. Why is this? Well, that's because it's actually running a full-blown bend physics simulation on these bones. Okay, so every time you install it, you're going to see it freak out, and you're probably wondering, is there a way to fix it? Of course, there's a very easy way to fix it, and that involves actually understanding what these attributes do. Because we're running an actual bend physics simulation, there are a couple of parameters you need to understand. The most important two parameters you should understand are damping and stiffness. Okay, so damping is the parameter which decides how quickly the system bleeds energy. The easiest way to describe it intuitively is, imagine if the object is moving through some viscous liquid. Okay, and the higher the damping, the thicker the opposing liquid is, right? So in other words, if you have a piece of motion run by the bend physics motor at the beginning where it freaks out like here, all you need to do is increase the damping. That will bleed energy out from the system. So if I increase this to 15 from 10, let's see what happens. I see it freaks out a bit less, right? And if I increase it again to 20, let's see what happens. Now it's a lot calmer, correct? So by just tweaking the damping parameter, you can get the system to behave much more nicely. And now it's actually wavering like a wavy piece of cloth, which is very, very cool. Okay, so that is the damping parameter of the bend physics motor. Now I can also change the stiffness parameter, and that essentially defines what it is. It makes the material less bendable. See, I made it 100 now, and so at 100 the material doesn't wave as much as when it was at 50, correct? That's what the stiffness parameter of this motor does. So you can play around with the damping and the stiffness, and that should give you the results that you want for a bendable piece of cloth, right? And typically the way we use the bend physics motor is we use it in conjunction with a rotate cycle motor. They almost always come in pairs. Not always, but they come in pairs in a very useful way. So this is my recommendation. If you want to make a bendable piece of cloth like a flag or cloth waving in a wind, it's extremely easy to do in Creature. In fact, it's almost trivial. You just install a rotate cycle motor at the base. This is the overall driving motion. Okay, this is like the driving motion of the cloth. And then you, for the rest of the chains, the bone chains, you install a bend physics motor, and that will take care of everything else. That'll take care of all the follow through. And just with 2 steps, you have a nice bendy cloth motion. Super simple in Creature. And of course, you can convert everything to FK, right? You convert everything to FK. It looks exactly the same, except of course, when I highlight these guys, it's all keyframes. So you can go in and then tweak all these values and customize them however you want. So this makes it a super powerful system, as you can tell, because you can come in, install a procedural motor system, get a very nice bendy cloth effect, and then convert it back into keyframes, and then tweak everything to a certain style. That's how we work in Creature. Okay, and the next motor I am going to show you is a very simple one. It's basically what we call a move bounce motor. So select one of the bones, click on Install Motor, and if I click on Move Bounce Motor, you're going to see something funny happen. Okay, that's not what we want, but that's because, again, the parameters are not correct, right? So what does a move bounce motor do? As you can see from this motion, essentially it moves an object horizontally or vertically, oscillating it, right, in both horizontal and vertical directions. And of course I can tweak these parameters, which are again keyable over time. So I am going to set that to 0, which is the amplitude x. That's how much it basically oscillates in x. I don't want it to oscillate in x, I only want it in y. So this is it in y, which is kind of ridiculous, but I'm going to reduce it as well. So let's set this to say 0.1. Okay, so now it's oscillating a lot less and not as ridiculous. Okay, and you're probably wondering what's the point of this. Well, let's take everything we've learned for this whole tutorial and put everything together. Okay, so I'm going to install IK on these legs. All right, so I'm going to come in and install IK on these legs. Set the correct angle. Let's set the IK on these legs. All right. Okay. If I play it, let's actually raise the legs just a bit more. Okay, if I play it, now I actually have some kind of cool breathing idle motion, right? The knight's actually sort of panting or getting ready for a fight. And that's because I have the move bounce motor, which is bouncing up and down the entire character. But I have the legs using IK, so they're targeting a point. Okay? And now you're saying, aha, but then the base feet aren't stuck to the ground. That doesn't make any sense. And so again, let's use what we learned. Let's install the free FK motor onto the feet. Let's do this. Let's install the free FK motor and see what we get now. So now I have the 2 feet planted nicely because they're free FK motors, so they have no respect for their parent hierarchy, which is exactly what we want. So they're glued to the ground, but I also have the move bounce motor moving the knight character up and down, and the IK is actually solving and targeting the actual legs, right? So the angles look correct, and they actually rotate and move about just like actual leg motion. And what's really cool about this is the bend physics behaves naturally. exactly like how I would expect. In fact, what's really cool about the procedural system is if you change a parameter, everything just sort of solves and acts naturally in place. What do I mean by this? Well, let's try increasing, for example, the amplitude of the move bounce motor to say 0.3. If I do this, see, immediately the cloth on the character responds naturally. It responds, in fact, to the base motion of the move bounce motor. Because we're running a full-blown physics simulation, everything just works. You don't even have to go in and tweak the parameters. Of course, you could if you think that it was too absurd. But what I'm trying to say is you don't have to do too much tweaking because the system responds to the base motion. And that's the true power of the procedural system. In any other animation system, if you were to change the base motion, you're going to have to be forced to change all the other bones or all the other kinds of follow-through motions that depend on the base motion, because obviously the follow-through motion by definition changes with the base motion. And the power of a procedural system like in Creature allows you to basically tweak the base motion and have everything else just fall into place. That is a huge time saver, and that's the reason why we use Creature for animation. Okay, so I hope this was a very good introduction to the base motor system of Creature, the bone motor system of Creature. There's a lot more advanced motors which I haven't covered in this tutorial, and they involve stuff like the leg motor, which allows you to do leg motion with 3 bones. There's also a custom cycle motor, which actually allows you to customize your very own motion and capture that into your own motor. So you can make any motion you want, any kind of custom keyframe motion you want, record that, and then it will play it back for you, and you can even speed it up, slow it down, and change the phase, just like how you would in a regular motor, except is your own custom motion. Very, very powerful motor. And there's also stuff like the path bone motor, which I've used in multiple demos, I'm sure you've seen, which allows you to make a bone follow a motion path, right? There's also a pin rope motor, which allows you to essentially make a group of bones act like a pinned rope object. Okay, so you can consider playing with that too. Again, these are all covered in the other tutorials. So that is essentially the bone procedural motor system of Creature. Very powerful, and once you get used to how it works, you can make some very, very compelling motion extremely quickly that you couldn't do in any other system. There's also other motors, of course. This is just the tip of the iceberg. These are just the bone motors. There's the region motors, and those are the motors that work on the actual meshes themselves. So again, that's a topic for another day. I might do a tutorial as well if you guys need it or demand for it. But what I'm trying to say is the Creature animation system is extremely powerful and allows you to customize almost every single part in terms of animation of your character. So I hope this was very useful for you guys, and have fun animating.